Hi, welcome to another special edition of Daily Airline News focusing on the tragic Air India crash. I'm Jeffrey Thomas. Delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon, Jeffrey.
So today we're calling this episode Clean Up, Clearing Up, question mark, exclamation mark. Let us explain. A video was published yesterday of the removal of the aft fuselage section of the Air India Boeing 787-8 from the BJ Medical College Student Hostel Refectory Building in Ahmedabad. We are showing the video of the crane removing the tailplane wreckage. Indian authorities and the municipal corporation have reportedly deployed earth movers, excavators, cranes, trucks and rollers to remove debris from the area around the wreckage and supposedly preserve key evidence for the ongoing investigation. I find that absolutely extraordinary, and I know you do, Richard, as well.
Yes, it is. Um, it begs the question whether the investigation has already recovered all the wreckage that they need. And it begs the question whether they already know what the cause is. And so, yep, you can go ahead, guys, and clear up and bring in the cranes and the excavators and the bulldozers. But it leaves, in my mind, quite a few questions open.
Look, it does, particularly when you consider the NTSB and the British AAIB investigators are party to this crash. It happened on Thursday. They would not have had teams in the air at the earliest till Friday, Saturday. So therefore, they probably weren't on site until Sunday. Now, a couple of days later, they're clearing it all away. It doesn't give them nearly enough time under normal circumstances of trying to find out what happened to properly examine the wreckage. I find it extraordinary. I really do. There is
Yeah,
just
and
not enough time.
we've seen before in crash sites how people painstakingly photograph everything and then they map out the whole area and they put stakes in the ground and indication signs and they take pictures and they measure from distance from one piece of wreckage to another. I mean, all of that takes a lot of time.
Look, it really does. It can take weeks and weeks of painstaking forensic work to examine. And then what they also try and do is rebuild the aircraft fuselage like they did with Transworld Airways 800 and many other crash aircraft is to rebuild as much of the airframe as they possibly can. So it really is a very serious issue. And unless, as you suggest, Richard, they already know what happened, and therefore, why don't we know? Why don't other 787 operators know? Then it's premature at best.
Yeah, indeed.
So we've got some great questions and comments from the viewers. Mickey Mac, 1230. I must say I was a bit surprised that the airport was back up and running again not long after this disaster. Considering that fuel contamination is a possibility, I would have thought they would have closed the airport or at least terminated refueling of aircraft until the fuel delivery system was checked by the accident investigation people. That's a good point.
Yeah, and it follows on from the first point we made about a quick clear up. So, Ahmedabad Airport normally operates 24/7. And when the Air India crash happened at 13:39 local time on the 12th of June, the airport was closed for just over 3 hours for both departures and arrivals. The airport reopened very promptly at 1700 local time. And my question there, Mickey Mac, is was this enough time to check all the fuel supply chain for contamination? And has there been any report made of the results of any tests that were carried out? Because I haven't seen them.
Now, Richard, I noticed a commentator on your website put forward a theory about the fuel issue. Can you sort of elaborate on that? And I believe you've done some investigation into this as well.
Yeah, he set me off on a long investigation, and for the sake of accuracy, I'm now theorizing. This is not pure speculation because I have some evidence upon which the theory is based, but it is by no means certain that this is what happened. The first fact that I have established is that the previous flight from Delhi to Ahmedabad always flies with only sufficient fuel for the 1 hour to 1 hour 25-minute flight. It's 416 nautical miles. And an analysis of all of the VTAMB registration flights, that's the crash aircraft, in the previous year between Delhi and Ahmedabad show an average takeoff speed in Delhi of 114.4 knots. And it depends on the direction of the takeoff, which depends on the wind direction, but it's always between 113.3 in one direction and 115.4 knots in the other. We're showing a screenshot of the data for those flights of the crash aircraft between DEL and AMD, Delhi and Ahmedabad. I did the same analysis again for all VTAMB flights in the previous year from AMD to London Gatwick, LGW. And the takeoff speed in Ahmedabad is on average 182.2 knots. And that's a much longer flight, 8 hours 44 minutes to 9 hours 38. And it's about 3,700 nautical miles. Again, some of the flights took off in one direction and others took off in the same direction as the crash aircraft. I'm showing another table of all of that data. And for me, this is clear proof that the aircraft weight is low in Delhi, but it is always usually high in Ahmedabad. We don't know the exact weight of each of these flights, but we do know there's a key difference in the fuel load between the two. So it's always low, much lower in Delhi than it is in Ahmedabad for the takeoff towards London Gatwick. So it shows for me that there could be an issue with the fuel refueling, which always did take place in Ahmedabad.
So, Richard, can you explain how the fuel load is calculated for each flight?
Yeah, I'll try to whiz you through it, but it's a long, complicated process. So this is for an Air India Boeing 787-8, and we're assuming 3,700 nautical miles from Ahmedabad to London Gatwick. So the first thing is the fuel burn rate and flight duration. Boeing 787-8 typically burns 4,900 kilos per hour in the cruise. It typically cruises at Mach 0.85, around 450 knots, depending on the winds. And the flight time over 3,700 nautical miles would typically be 8.2 hours. The trip fuel calculation for the en route fuel is then 4,900 kilos per hour times 8.2 hours is 40,200 kilos. There'll be some reserve, contingency, and additional fuel. And when you add in a final reserve of 30 minutes holding, say 2,450 kilos, contingency for alternate airports, weather delays, which is typically set at 5%, which is 2,010 kilos. And then they add in for taxiing and a bit more for the climb and descent, say 1,500 kilos. If you add all of that up, you get to 46,160 kilos of trip fuel.
So, what would normally happen during the refueling at Ahmedabad?
Well, assuming 46,160 kilos is the total trip fuel, and assuming there was the contingency and reserve left in the tank, say around 2,450 kilos from the previous flight from Delhi, then they would need to load 43,710 kilos. And that will be spread between the left wing tank, the right wing tank, and the center tank. So, in my view, the left and right wing tanks would both take 15,300 kilos, and the center tank would take 13,110. But we don't know precisely how the tanks were filled.
So, then, what is in this new theory that you've got?
Well, the left and right wing tanks have a capacity each of 24,000. So the whole fuel could be taken by the wing tanks. And if the center tank only had a small amount remaining from the previous flight and had not recently been sumped clear of water or other contaminants, there could be enough fuel from the center tank, which is first used in a takeoff, to taxi out, to take off, and start the climb. But then there would be a simultaneous dual flame out, and it could have just been at the wrong moment, around 8 seconds after takeoff.
So, yeah, okay, but what evidence is there that this theory is plausible or even possible?
Well, I looked at the altitude and ground speed from the ADS-B data of all the VTAMB taking off on runway 23 in the same direction as the crash flight. And when it was first picked up by ADS-B at the end of the runway, and we're showing a Google Earth map of the 4 points that match this criteria, all from AMD to Gatwick flights, and all have been augmented with data of the actual weather conditions at the time. Now, the altitude is between 550 feet and 625 feet, and the ground speed is between 174 and 190 knots. The crash flight is marked in red, and the others are in white. And the altitude by the crash flight that the crash flight reached is the highest, but the ground speed is the slowest. And you start to think, why is that the case? And of course, we've got the actual temperature and the wind direction and speed and the pressure data, and they're all taken from a point beside the takeoff point on the relevant date and time in Ahmedabad. We don't actually know the aircraft weight and the thrust setting on each flight. but it begs the question, was there an over rotation on takeoff?
Okay. Yeah, well, that's certainly a fascinating scenario. We've got a few questions if you can take them, Richard. Noel 56Z. I saw a news report early days on that this individual aircraft had been in storage for some time and had some components removed for other aircraft and had been recently returned to service. Hopefully, this did not have any connection to this tragedy. Again, thanks for your reporting and discussion, which I look forward to each day.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. No, it's factually incorrect what has been reported. VTAMB made 711 flights in the last year. There was never in storage. There was never a recent return to service. It was flying almost every day, non-stop. And I can send you a spreadsheet if you want with all of the flights.
At SB at most says, sorry, your analysis didn't pay attention to as to what caused the loud noise.
Yeah, well, we did specifically mention 2 days ago. Viewers differ on whether the noise came from the engines, the rat, or the impact. We also said, and I quote, viewers differ on exactly when the loud noise occurred. On the runway, during acceleration, in the climb out, the moment the rat was deployed, or when the tail hit the refectory roof. So, we have been into that one, SB at most.
Yeah, we have. Jeffrey Hall, 6345. Why does your vertical profile show climb from 0 to 625 feet? The 787 did not climb 625 feet because it started at airfield elevation, not sea level.
Yeah, Jeffrey, you're quite correct. We also showed the aerodrome chart, which indicates the runway starts at 189 feet and then goes down to 182 feet, and then goes back up to 186 feet, and finally back down again to 180 feet. So you're quite correct in pointing that out. It is a hypothetical vertical profile, and I used 0 feet as a baseline because the ADS-B data uses pressure altitude at mean sea level and not geometric altitude. We've also explained in a previous episode the importance of finding out which altitude is being used in any observation and the difference between a pressure altitude at the standard atmosphere and the pressure altitude at the actual local pressure and local temperature, which may not be the standard 1013.25 hectopascal or 15 degrees centigrade. We've also explained how GPS altitude is calculated based on the WGS 84 model of the Earth. And no, lo and behold, we get complaints from some viewers that this is too technical for a layman, which I can also understand. So, Jeffrey, tell me, what do you suggest as the solution to this issue? We know the airport is not located at 0 feet above sea level. How should we present altitude data to viewers?
Now, Richard from Gap 9992, in the airport video of the takeoff, the little hut in the foreground is only approximately 1/3 down the runway, which means it rotated approximately 2/3 down the runway. This ties in with the ADS-B data-ish. This means that the dust seen in the video at rotation is not dust, but smoke. Shame the origin is obscured by the hut, FOD, damage on the runway.
Yeah, that's a good thought. whether there was smoke and not dust. And as you correctly point out, gap 9992, you can't really tell the difference in the videos that I've seen. So again, it's a plausible scenario. There might have been a foreign object debris on the runway, and there might have been smoke because of fuel contamination. There might have been no smoke at all. It could have been dust. I really don't know.
Okay. Now, Nogomo Langini 3407. Hi, gents. Thanks for the videos. Appreciate all your work. I would like to disagree with Jeffrey. Oh, that's not very nice. Ruling out a design flaw and saying it would have surfaced many years ago. If there is a part of the aircraft that was designed to last for 20 years and it fails after 15 years, that can be considered as a design flaw. Therefore, even though the 787 has been flying for many years without any issues, that does not completely rule out a design flaw. Sometimes, like that would also mean all similar aircraft are in danger of suffering the same problem after 15 years. Thanks again. I'm a South African currently living in Canada. So I guess that's my
Yeah, over to you, Jeffrey.
yeah, thank you. Look, you make a very good point. But typically, if there is a problem with an aircraft, it will occur in the first, well, it'll occur in testing, obviously, because aircraft are subjected to intense testing. For instance, structural testing. They put through two lifetimes of wear, and then when it comes to the wing then must not break when it is subjected to 150% of its design load. Now, that's the fuselage and the wing. All the other components on an aircraft go through a rigorous testing regime to ensure that they will indeed meet their design criteria. That's not to say that some do fail. So I take your point, but the overwhelming majority of problems with aircraft do occur within the first 12 to 18 months of service. But yes, I do take your point. There could be a failure of a component shy of its design life, and it may also be a failure because of a flaw in the material. And that does happen, and that does happen quite a lot, where you have a failure with the raw material, which is one of the reasons why aviation is so meticulous about tracking not only the parts and who put the aircraft together, but the raw material from which those parts were made. So I do take your point. Thank you for posting it.
Can
So
I
zero. Sorry.
just add to that?
Yeah.
When we were testing, for example, autopilot systems or automatic landing systems, you have to do a walkthrough of the design of the software and the circuitry boards included. You have to take those circuit boards and introduce failures and to see that the system would cope with that failure. And many of these systems are duplicated, triplicated, or quadruplicated. So if, for example, on an automatic landing system, if you have four systems running, three of them can outvote another one that has a different result at any point in time. It's very complicated, and it's very difficult to actually then have a design flaw that lives on for 15 years.
Mm. Anyway, our most concise and clear analysis of your videos. Do you know if this plane had any maintenance done before its flight, or on another channel they said no work was done this time? I was wondering if downlock pins are still used on the 787s. I remember a case going back where the pins were left in place by mistake. The pilots could not retract the gear. They fitted red streamers to alert ground crew. Not saying it's case here, but interested to know about them. Not much info on them. Prayers and thoughts to those in the incident.
Yeah, well, you're quite right. They go round and remove the red streamers, but um, to answer your question, we do not have the technical log or a list of maintenance work done. So we don't know what open issues there might have been with this aircraft. And that is something that will come out in the investigation.
So from DS Rob, again, I'm no expert in these matters, but I noticed that the rear landing gear wheels were pointing down. The reason I believe this to be relevant is that they are horizontal on takeoff and landing, so all four wheels make contact. However, when the landing gear up is selected, the wheels position downwards. This is an intentional mechanical action that occurs as part of the gear retraction sequence to allow the wheels to fit into the curved gear well properly. So it would appear from the video the wheels were pointing down like someone had engaged the landing gear, but it hadn't happened, which might be an indicator as to where the power loss occurred.
Well, that's a very good observation, DS Rob, and we will follow that up. And I will look more closely at uh, the landing gear and the videos we have and see at exactly at what point. And what I don't know at the moment is the timing of the sequence. What you say is correct. The landing gear is moved from the horizontal position and pointing away from the horizontal in order to fit into the undercarriage when it's retracted. So I will try and get the sequence for the 787-8 of the landing gear retraction. There's normally a YouTube video to be seen with where they test it at Boeing before shipping an aircraft out.
Humanity underscore hope. Is there any regulation restricting residential areas so close to the runway at both sides?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And planning rules do differ in each country and even in each cities. And we do not know what the planning rules are in Medabad, except quite obviously the medical college hostel for students and the refectory were right on the flight path and only 1.5 kilometers from the airport. So yeah, we'll dig into that one. Thank you, Humanity Hope.
But in actual fact, Richard, there are literally thousands of airports around the world that have residential suburbs all around them.
I know.
Yeah, it's rather interesting that they, for instance, in Australia, they build an airport, they build a brand new airport, for instance, out in the country. And then the next thing you know is everybody wants to, for some reason, wants to live around the airport. For many people, it's because the airport provides employment, whether it's ground handling, catering, whatever, and they obviously want to live close to the job they do. So it's a real issue. And then what you then have is people complaining about the noise. So it's airports are a big
Yeah.
issue in those spaces. Absolutely. I think that's all we've got time for today, Richard. Thank you very much indeed for all your work on this fuel theory. It's really fascinating. And viewers, we're going to be back tomorrow to answer more of your questions as we probe more into the loss of this Air India 787. And so please subscribe to us, please like us, please keep the comments coming, and we do love the questions. And Richard, once again, thank you for all your work today.
You're welcome.
And viewers, please tune in tomorrow. We look forward to your company.